Erin O'Toole is saying goodbye to the House of Commons. The former Conservative leader marked the end of his 10-year political career with a speech in the chamber last week. O'Toole denounced the current state of politics and issued a warning to his fellow MPs.
Instead of leading, instead of debating our national purpose in this chamber, too many of us are often chasing algorithms down a sinkhole of diversion and division. Performance politics is fueling polarization. Virtue signaling is replacing discussion. And far too often, Mr. Speaker, we're just using this chamber to generate clips, not to start national debates. Too often, we're allowing conspiracy theories about the UN or the World Economic Forum go unchallenged, or we attribute sinister motives to these organizations or people in a way that is simply not true or not fair.
Erin O'Toole joins me now. Mr. O'Toole, thanks for joining us and congratulations on your impending retirement.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back.
You spoke in your speech to Parliament of the need to listen and to build bridges and to reach out. Do you think the caucus you're leaving behind is following that advice?
I think they are. You know, what I've said in the last few years is there's been parts of the country feeling left out of the national discussion. Western Canada, of course, but even parts of rural Atlantic Canada don't feel that they're being listened to in Ottawa. So I think our party's been speaking to that. We also have to meet the hopes, fears, and aspirations of urban cities and suburban voters. And so that's the challenge any national leader has. And I think our party will rise to that challenge. But as I said, the pandemic accelerated some of these feelings of disconnect from Ottawa. And we need to do a lot to make sure that people hear their needs being met by their parliamentarians.
The pandemic also fueled a lot of things like conspiracy theories, and you warned in your speech that too many of us are often chasing algorithms down a sinkhole of diversion and division, and that performance politics is fueling this polarization. If you look at the by-election happening right now in Portage-Lisgar, the Conservative candidate there, he's running on conspiracy theories about the World Economic Forum, and he's saying he would have voted against conversion therapy, for example. Again, is that the path you're recommending, these sorts of positions?
Well, I think that by-election in particular is heavily influenced by Maxime Bernier showing up. And, you know, this is someone I've seen in my political career. There's no one more divisive or someone that brings up these things more than Maxime Bernier. So I think Brendan is responding to that. It is unfortunate. I'm proud of the move our caucus made a year and a half ago on banning conversion therapy. And so I think we don't need to revisit those issues, but I think people also have to look beyond the by-election issues to the wider national interest. And that's kind of what I tried to express in my speech, is that left and right have to sometimes look at the wider issue than just what your own social media following says.
Right, but like I appreciate the impact that Maxime Bernier is having on that race. I mean, you're dead right on that. But do you have to match the positions? Do you sort of have to match the conspiracy, or can you rebut a guy like Maxime Bernier instead of diving into that world of sort of fringe views on things like the World Economic Forum?
Well, look, I said purposely, I think we have to, if you don't like certain celebrity causes happening at Davos, go there and advocate for other things, like Stephen Harper did for energy, for that matter. But I think, you know, with Maxime trying to maintain his relevance, he's making those issues the centerpiece of the debate. And I do think the fact that some of us, like Pierre and myself, have been around to see Maxime Bernier do 180s on everything from Davos to LGBTQ rights. I think that sort of hypocrisy needs to be called out, because it breeds cynicism. And I think, you know, that's a by-election in one of the most conservative ridings in the country, David. So I don't think it's kind of atypical. I'm going to be watching more Oxford, the Winnipeg seat. I actually think Conservatives will take 3 of the 4 by-elections today, largely because there's such fatigue with the Trudeau Liberals.
Okay, I want to touch on that in just a second, but I have one more question about Max Bernier. I mean, how important is it for the Conservatives sort of to wipe out the People's Party of Canada? I mean, you dealt with them in the 2021 campaign. How important is it for the Conservatives to move forward to move Maxime Bernier completely off the board and put an end to the PPC?
I don't think it's as important as some of the media narrative I've seen in the last week. Certainly, that by-election in Portage is responding to issues that Max is bringing, but Max is representing increasingly a shrinking number of disgruntled voices that are completely out of step. During the last pandemic, he wrapped himself against vaccine mandates, against various health measures. And because of the fatigue at the time, that led him to rise up to unusual heights. We had to tolerate that as a party, but I don't think we should set our agenda based on what Mad Max says. You know, he is someone that's just raising money to pay for his own bills these days. We have to look at the wider issue, and I think it would be better politics if people let Max go into retirement. The fact that he's still going to be kicking around while I'm gone is one of those regrets, I guess.
You mentioned that you think the Conservatives are going to win 3 of the 4 by-elections tonight. They'll win the 3 seats in English Canada. Winnipeg South Centre would be the pickup there. A seat that, a bit like Mississauga Lakeshore last time round, a seat the Conservatives need to win eventually if they're going to form the next government. What would it mean if they're unable to break through in Winnipeg South Centre? Because there is some skepticism that Mr. Poilievre's team can get it done there tonight.
I think they're going to get it done. You know, Manitoba is a Western province. I've always called it the linchpin between Ontario and the West. So it's got issues of manufacturing and other things that Ontario has, but also Western issues. Jim Carr's influence. Jim was, you know, very well regarded person, both from provincial and federal politics. So I think his son will have an added halo from just the goodwill towards Jim and his sad passing. So I think that will counter what would be more of a protest vote against the Trudeau Liberals than normal. But I feel it out there, David, when I speak to people from across the country. There's a desire for change. So I think the Conservatives will bring it home there. We held that seat with Joyce Bateman when we were in government. I went there to do some events as minister. I think there's a natural Conservative base that will get out and vote. But the by-elections are interesting. I came in a by-election in 2012. People thought it was important because Bev Oda was leaving in the 905. Would the Conservatives win in the 905? Yes, we did. So it will be, you know, interesting for the day, but the wider terms is we do have to win seats like the Mississauga, like the 905, like the suburban voters, whether in Winnipeg, Toronto, or Vancouver. And I've given them recommendations to the team and will be there to help if I can. That will be where the next election is decided, the suburbs of Canada.
Well, what are the things what is the path forward for the Conservatives on this? What are the issues they still need to confront? I mean, there is a serious disconnect on climate policy, it seems, that they need to bridge. There's an issue with guns in the last election that was a controversy for you in the election campaign. And then there's Mr. Poilievre's personal style right now, which is very sort of aggressive. And a lot of his critics say he's rage farming and sort of fostering that discontent. I mean, is this the path to winning? What do you think the Conservatives need to do to displace Justin Trudeau finally?
Well, I think the biggest thing will just be government in waiting. We have to show that we have the economic ideas. I think by the time there's an election, David, I think we will be in a recession. It'll be a matter of whether it's a short one or a more pronounced one. We're seeing the interest rate pressures and the inflationary pressures on people that I raised way back when I was leader, you know, saying that this was going to cause immense pressure in the suburbs where people are going to be heavily indebted. So I think the cost of living crisis, solution to housing, which Pierre's already putting things out, will be fundamental. That said, I've said, having campaigned my entire career in the suburbs, people want to know what we're going to do on climate. They're not asking for perfection, but I do think we have to come up with a series of smart policies to make sure that we win on economic priorities and cost of living crisis, but also have enough policy strength in areas where they want to know where the Conservatives stand. We tried to do that in the election. I think we did it all right on the environment. Other issues came into play, but I think that's something our caucus and the leader will focus on ahead of the next election.
Do you think that's where the party is going right now? There's a lot of focus on culture war issues, it seems, from time to time. The fight right now, for example, on safe supply in British Columbia and these sorts of issues. I mean, is that a winning strategy that you're seeing where you say a government in waiting, but really what we see Mr. Poilievre do is whatever the problem is, no matter what the jurisdiction is, it's Justin Trudeau's fault?
Well, this is a great example, David. I'm glad you brought it up with addiction and some of the challenges we're seeing in our cities. Some of the voices on the so-called progressive left have been just saying harm reduction, safe supply, we don't need any treatment options. In the last election, I said we need treatment alongside harm reduction because, you know, if we don't offer people a path out, So we were planning on opening 20 plus treatment centers paid for by the federal government. I think Pierre's talking a lot about treatment. Obviously, the problem in our cities has gotten worse post-COVID. The opioid crisis is horrific on how many lives it's taken from Canadian families. So I think this is an area where we do have to have more cross-pollination, where, you know, the harm reduction and safe supply and people that never talk about treatment because they don't like 12-step programs or whatever their reluctance is. But on the other side, on the right, we also have to point out ways to keep people well, reduce harms, but get people on a path. You know, my mayor in Oshawa has done this personally himself. So I've taken my learnings from some of my experience in 10 years, and I hope we have a real debate on this rather than just with social media, the left talking to the left, the right talking to the right.
Well, the safe supply advocates we've had on this program certainly see it as a bridge to treatment, not as a solution in and of itself. I know Mr. Poilievre is saying no safe supply, treatment only. So there is certainly, again, a bridge that in that debate that needs to be.
Well, but in fairness, a couple of years ago, I heard from some of the treatment advocates in Western Canada that there was a set of national meetings in Ottawa, and treatment was not a subject of discussion at all. It was all legalization and safe supply. So I've seen kind of absolutism on critical debates like this a little too much in Ottawa in recent years. So I do think Pierre's bringing a forcefulness and a bit of a aggressive style more than me. But I think that's natural after, you know, us losing 2 elections, you know, the last one very close. But I think people are frustrated with a lack of balance. So I think what Conservatives have to do is highlight that frustration, but also bring a bit of balance and some ideas.
Well, let's bring that back, this absolutism that you're talking about, that we're seeing from Mr. Poilievre and from some others. Doesn't this go back to sort of the algorithms? We're following our followers, as you said in your speech, that people are chasing sort of these hardened, extreme kind of views down this sinkhole of social media rather than searching for the common ground?
That's something that we're going to have to watch. I think going back to the by-elections you talked about earlier, you know, Maxime Bernier was harvesting people that were stuck by lockdowns, or small business owners, or people that were either vaccine hesitant or even stridently anti-vax, and farming those supporters. He would change his views for it. Right. I don't think we as a Conservative Party embrace that approach. There's been a lot of people in the last leadership that might have come into our party from anti-lockdown measures or convoy measures. We can't set our policy based on that. We have to still be kind of ordered liberty Conservatives that take people's concerns, but work with our institutions, work on a plan to address the frustrations without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I think Pierre is speaking to those frustrations, but ahead of the next election, suburban voters will want to see, what are you going to do? And so I think showing a government in waiting with some great ideas. We've seen this with housing from Pierre. I think he's had some great ideas, some of which we ran on. He's building on those, but we're going to have to offer these on the environment, on health and addressing the healthcare crisis, and reconciliation as well. So I think our party's up for it. I think there was a lot of ideas that we ran on last time that outside of a pandemic election would have really resonated with Canadians, and I'm more than happy if the team steals any of those ideas because I'm very proud of them.
Well, a question I had watching your speech in Parliament last week was you talked about how people are chasing algorithms and using social media, and I remembered you hiring Canada Proud, you know, during your leadership. How is that any different, and the tactics that they used online with memes and attack videos, how is that any different than the sort of behavior you were sort of decrying in your speech last week?
Well, 2 things, David. I included myself in my speech, and in my exit interviews, including this with you here on Power and Politics, I don't claim perfection here by any stretch of the imagination, but in my 10 years, I've seen this, and I think we understand the algorithm aspect of politics a little better now. The other thing, and I hear this, you know, regularly about what you did during the leadership, leaderships are a little different than a general election campaign, and people might squabble with that, but we're talking amongst people that have self-selected by buying a $15 membership in our campaign. So yes, there was more talk about pipelines and energy. Yes, there was more talk about public safety and support for the Canadian Armed Forces, and, you know, concerns about Beijing and communist China. because our members were very passionate about those things. Did I sometimes, with some of my humor and some of the videos or some of my discussion of cancel culture, lead things to kind of show a crass portrayal of me on certain issues? Yeah, and I learned a little from that. But that wasn't a general election campaign.
It's all a continuum, isn't it? It's all a continuum. It's stuff you're putting on the public record. It's stuff you're putting into the public domain. I mean, it's hard in 2023 to parse the two, isn't it?
No, I don't think so. I think Canadians realize that, especially people that don't vote Conservative, they realize they're not buying a membership and they're not voting in this contest. What I think we see social media do is some of these flippant or crass portrayals that I've said that I fell victim to of my own sort of leaning forward, is then held out later on as your portrayal of the wider debate when you were using humor or underscoring a point in a leadership. I think most Canadians do understand that. I think what those little vignettes or those little video clips do, David, is just reinforce what the various bubbles of people already think. So the people on Twitter that already dislike Conservatives throw it around as an example, and the people that are voting Conservative already probably don't think it went far enough. So I'm hoping issues like foreign interference in our election or preparing in the Arctic for our sovereignty, support for Ukraine, I'm hoping we can have more of these crossover issues where you can see the parties getting along. I've spoken positively about Minister Anand stepping up to try and equip the Canadian Armed Forces and her support for Ukraine. I'd like Mr. Trudeau to give her more money in the budget, because I do think we have a good defense minister after 8 years in Miss Anand. So I think if there's areas where we can actually show, hey, the country's doing a good thing supporting Ukraine, it helps us shout down some of these things online, including misinformation, suggesting that we shouldn't be helping Ukraine. I think we need more examples of these national level issues that rise above the partisanship.
Just one last question. Are you done with politics for good? I know you're done for now. Are you done forever?
I don't think you'll be seeing me back in politics, David. I'm going to be working in and around trade and global security, running ADIT North America, something that uses my trade, my business, and even my military security background. So I will wade in the odd time on geopolitical issues and Canada becoming a little more ambitious on trade and investment. But I don't think you'll see Erin O'Toole, the pundit, around anymore, unless there's a grassroots movement within CBC to draft me one day. You give me a call if that happens.
Well, you know what? We always like having Conservatives on this program. Erin O'Toole, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, David.